When people talk about growth in iGaming with Europe as a market, they probably mean the UK, Germany, or France. If it's outside of Europe, though, then we're talking probably USA, then Latam, then Asia, right? But here's the thing, there is this region that keeps being ignored way too often, which has different rules and a lot of possibilities. And that region is Eastern Europe. In this episode of the Square Table, brought to you by Kensho Media, I'm sitting down with Deepak Shukla to talk about the unfair side of SEO, why non-English markets can give you a bigger upside, what many iGaming teams get wrong where they tend to go local, and how to sell yourself up in a new region without wasting months on the wrong plan. If you work in iGaming and you want growth that isn't just fighting the same old battles, stick around. As usual, I'm your host Victor Julio Coupé, and you are watching in an episode prior to this one, I talked to Álvaro Lozano from Spain, talking about Latin and localization in Latin, because a lot of iGaming companies right now are moving to different regions of the world, whereas everybody wants to focus on the United States, Europe, maybe a little bit of Asia. We're now seeing more conversations going towards Latin, towards Africa, towards Australia. But one thing that I sometimes, and it might be my fault, don't read much about is Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Because you see, whenever most of the world talks about Europe, it's this side of Europe. We're talking about maybe the UK, France,
Yeah.
Germany, these types of places are the ones that represent the majority of the European market. But what about the rest? What makes Eastern Europe different in search, and why can it feel, how can I say, less crowded than
Yeah.
English markets?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think that we tend to focus on English language economies because they're the most developed in terms of geographic spread and business usage. So, English as a foreign language is, of course, the most spoken foreign language in the world, and people don't often realize that. So, I think it's very normal. Now, all of that being said, I think it leads a lot of almost asymmetric opportunities in non-English language, particularly, for example, Eastern Europe, with Russian being the example, languages for a couple of reasons that I think also are very advantageous when we think about it in the context of iGaming. So just broadly, number one, learning the Yandex algorithm as opposed to the Google algorithm. It's going to be a smaller market, so less sophisticated, number one. Typically what that means is rules that are outdated in the UK when it comes to the penguins or the pandas or the hummingbirds. These don't necessarily apply in other economies. So that means that you can do less and get more fundamentally, much in the same way that a lot of nascent early stage technology or otherwise comes up in English. My wife is Italian and she'll often say, my God, I have to use chat GPT in English because I get an entirely different result in Italian and I just can't use it for the quality of insight that I need in any area that she goes specific. So less competitive, less sophisticated, more upside opportunity, therefore. And also, when you think about iGaming, a lot of the people that do game tend to be people that have more time, more freedom of time, and ultimately spend more time perhaps at home alone. And that skews quite well to any economy that's isolated or troubled. And
Yes.
there happens to be an overlay with that with a lot of Eastern European countries, as well as, of course, countries further afield. And then finally, I'd say that what people don't necessarily realize, if you look at some of the sleeping giants in the room, for those of you who are listening, ask ChatGPT or Claude or whatever LLM that you use, give me some examples of million to $100 million companies in any space that I would know as household names in the UK or USA that grew initially in non-English language speaking markets. I know for a fact that Notion, Canva, Mailshake, all household names in the technology space, all grew first in non-English language economies. So I just think there's a huge opportunity to reap returns there.
Do you know the regions of these set examples where they grew? Because whenever I think of Canva, for example, back in Sao Paulo, back in Brazil, everybody was using Canva when it got out. So I can see, for example, developing countries where
Yeah.
not everybody could afford an Adobe Premiere subscription, they would go to Canva. Do you feel, and did you see if that is indeed a correlation? Poorer countries made a dent on these companies, not because they were, as you said, so they weren't even English markets, but they were developing markets.
Yeah. So I think that also what's interesting is that, yes, especially when there's examples of tools that are trying to knock out more expensive incumbent competitors. So that's also what these tools have in common. There were enterprise versions. So for Canva, it would have been Adobe. For Mailshake, it might have been any ESP that's
Yeah.
enterprise, maybe some kind of Oracle integration
And
for
Oracle would
email.
be the
That,
one, yeah.
yeah. Then for Notion, it might have been again
Office
something.
subscription.
Exactly, exactly. So absolutely yes. And then there's that whole approach of bottom up marketing that if you penetrate people at an individual level within organizations, and that's how you can get corporate buy-in. And probably, I mean, Slack's a great example of that in terms of what their go-to-market strategy was. So broadly or shortly rather, not broadly but shortly, for iGaming, I just think it represents a huge opportunity. And what's interesting also is even looking at English language in some of these economies is also really easy to rank. We have an event catering business. It's a completely separate example. But what's really interesting is the majority of our revenue comes from countries where we rank in English, where English isn't widely spoken. So we get some of our best work in Spain and in France and Italy and Greece because there's so little English language competitive search in those countries that we do very little in terms of our SEO effort to such an extent that we said, you know what, let's bin focusing on corporate catering London. Let's do corporate catering Barcelona, corporate catering in Madrid. And what do you know? Country, or rather, businesses that are looking to do business in these countries internationally, but come with an English language lens, want a local English language speaker to then deploy local language market services. So I would be also really curious for the iGaming audience out there. Have you even thought about if you think, well, I need a Spanish speaker and I need Spanish infrastructure, I need to translocalize my geolocalize my site? Why don't you just try ranking in English in Russia and see what happens?
And look, we are living in a digital nomad era. We're living in a immigration heavy era. We have so many different people in different regions. As you say so yourself, Russia, we have a lot of English speaking people in Russia. I don't know why. They have their reasons, but they do speak English. They don't speak Russian. Let's target them. It is indeed something that we, again, as I said in the beginning, we have been talking lately more and more and more about going outside, now regionally talking about the USA and this part of Europe, as I was mentioning. I've
Yeah.
also heard from some colleagues of mine that link building it's tougher over on Eastern Europe, for example, than it is in Western. Would you, with your experience, have any notes about this saying?
So broadly speaking, there's a couple of frameworks that we need to consider. So there's a general rule of thumb that, of course, the more competitive a market, the more requirement or sophistication that link building is required in. And that's typically markets that are attached to money or attached to markets that are sensitive in any way. That is true across any language. So it doesn't matter if it's English or it's Spanish. If you're trying to rank for particular types of services that are mainstream, then it's going to be more challenging. Now, with the idea that it's more challenging at a geolocal level, it isn't. But what is more challenging is being able to acquire effective local links. So when what people are typically able to do, which for example is we could all build a Web 2.0 or a manual link or a pillow link, or there's different names for it, right? So manual link building. When it comes to then acquiring relevant PR, digital PR links at a local language level, you're likely to have more success if you actually have local language knowledge as opposed to just using an LLM to translate everything and then pitch it. People, when you're dealing with a human on the other side of it, they
I
will very
noticed.
easily be able to notice and or look at your website and say you're not local.
Hmm.
So you're going to get a no. So what people mean when they say that it's tougher is this part here. So then within particular spaces within let's continue the thread and say, okay, so what do we do with that with iGaming? Then I think there's a couple of elements. Like, so number one, if you're, for example, trying to target things at a multilingual level, because if you're thinking about Russian, you're probably thinking about another language first. So you're saying, right, I'm going to do English, I'm going to do Spanish, then maybe I'm going to do Russian. So then at, of course, a local level, most people don't really properly think about reputation brand management at a geo-local level. So even at an English language level, so for example, Pearl Lemon, we get a lot of inquiries from the US, but we had to do a brand positioning change because they could quickly see you're not really American, you're English in the UK. And that's a no, because we just want someone that's local. So then we had to look at our brand language search within New York, look at phone numbers. So I think that a lot of people get that wrong also. And the difference is that when you start dealing with humans, and that's really what that is digital PR.
Yeah, yeah. And now talking about it, you said so yourself, AIs, LLMs, they are able to get us a message that is localized, but they're not able to mimic maybe the slangs, maybe the expressions, the local expressions. So I agree. It's not only about just going to ChatGPT and saying, hey, I'm moving to Ukraine right now and I need to create an Ukrainian campaign. Can you help me with that? Sure, it's going to be able to write like an Ukrainian, but it's not going to resonate. And resonating is something very important. Throughout SEO, we say that the links must be relevant,
Yeah,
content must be relevant as well.
yeah, yeah.
Everything
The
else,
copy, the copy needs to be
the
relevant,
copy
and what
needs to
people
be relevant.
and what people so the funny thing is that we do a lot of cold email as part of what we do because it's a backbone of outreach. Basically,
Yeah.
what is link building? It's great communication, and learning communication first actually then translates across all of the messaging you send out. And the workaround for those of you who are thinking, oh, you know what? Well, what am I going to do? Just remember, when you, for example, target Russian link building, there's business language Russian in Moscow, there's
True.
business language in St. Petersburg, then there's cultural, just like it is in every country. So you'll know if someone's a Londoner or if someone's a New Yorker, and if they're
Yeah.
a New Yorker artsy person or a New York investment banker. So when you prompt the LLMs, build in some of these prompts, and it's the prompt engineering that isn't thought through enough. So what happens is that people look at geolocalization as a bit of a cherry on top when really treat it like the cake. Really think it through carefully, and you'll discover that actually the ability to do it is there, but the way that you're structuring your outreach is fundamentally flawed because you can write localized content, but someone will quickly see that you're not local, and you need to just follow the thread the whole way through.
Can give you a very, very clear example of how true what you're saying is by going outside of iGaming and SEO and talking about movies, the Oscars, actually.
Yeah.
The recent one, there was a Brazilian movie called The Secret Agent. And
Okay.
naturally, us Brazilians, we wanted to watch the movie because it was, it was a nominee for the Oscars. That's huge for Brazil,
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah.
So the movie happens in a region of Brazil that I've never been to myself. Never. And at the end of the movie, I had to go to YouTube to watch The Secret Agent explained because they had so many local jokes, local references, local everything about that region of Brazil. Even I, as a Brazilian, couldn't understand anything whatsoever. This is a true story of how important it is to understand localize, get somebody in local to understand better about the culture and the languages and everything else.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
still, companies don't do that enough.
But
Otherwise,
then,
we
then
wouldn't be talking about it even.
Exactly, exactly. You just explained the whole rationale around train spotting and how I watch it, and I'm like, I've got this is an English movie. I don't understand anything that's going on, and yeah, it's great. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot more thoughtfulness that needs to be applied, and what happens is that people do a bit of a spam, spray and pray approach when actually, if you just take a little bit more thinking, you can again, I'll repeat it. You can get asymmetric, like disproportionate returns from non-English language regions. And we've seen it happen multiple times. And a lot of the thinking, if you just spend a couple more hours up front, really thinking through the messaging, because it doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be good
Hmm.
enough. And
Hmm.
the comparison at the moment is typically little or bad, which is why it's great because you're not doing it in a saturated market. So when we talk about the bar, I'm talking about ideal world bar. You don't need to do that much more than what you're doing currently to see success.
Just get it out at least, right? Don't wait it for it to be perfect, then to start pitching yourself or doing, I don't know, A/B testing. Start from scratch right now. Do the most as you can. Grow up with that. All of
Yeah.
these lessons and all of these conversations will point us towards SEO, and this is an SEO Run channel. I'm Victor, as you already know, as the host, but I'm also the head of business development at Kensho Media, doing SEO for iGaming and high stakes markets since 2008. If you're on the lookout for anything that we have been talking, not only on this video, but on the other one as well, you know how to find us at kenshomedia.com. D, let me ask you another still relevant and still tying up to the last questions. This, I believe, can be explained as one of the first wrong assumptions that companies do, not localizing. Now, how do you, even at your own time helping such companies, how do you set up the site so that Google, you actually said Yandex, because for those that don't know, Google doesn't run in Russia, Yandex does. So
Yeah.
for the search engine that we're talking about, how do you set it up so that the search engine understands each country properly without turning into a huge translation project? Besides hreflang, besides the technical part of SEO that I think the audience is aware of, is there something else from your experience that you know, this also helps?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that when you are going to do localization, one of the classic mistakes I see that people make is they allow the, for example, Russian version of their site to be indexed too early. I would definitely set it as, for example, no index, and then really work to make sure that you've got a proper basic foundational link profile that's geolocalized when you set it to go to index, because otherwise, really, what the crawlers see is a site that's massively indexed in ENG with 5% of their content being in RU Russian. And it actually sends completely the wrong signal to local index, local crawl bot, basically, which whether it's Yandex or whether it's Google crawl, but whatever area of the Eastern bloc that you're looking at that it penetrates. So what happens is that people, when they send their first impression to the crawl bots, they don't really think about the fact that you've got a lot of historical data that relates to geo an area that's completely unrelated to the area you're trying to penetrate. So I think that people don't think through signaling enough. So it's like me applying to make fajitas, and I come in walking through the door with a chef's restaurant from a Michelin star restaurant. You said we're fajitas, we're Mexican, and you send complete. So I think
It doesn't
signaling,
communicate.
yeah, exactly. So I think number one, signaling in terms of making sure that you know index, you build all of the links, you make sure that they're the foundational links that are, so whatever the Yandex equivalent or the local equivalent is to the business, linked it, the social profiles, because they are different depending upon the region that you go to. And I would say that when you then extend that out, I would make a little bit of an effort to do a little bit of social signals, because they use that to really verify that there's local presence. So that's just, for example, and you can do it with translated content, but put out basically content to show you that you exist. Because as we know, Google and the crawlers pick up social signals before they'll pick up your actually main entity when you're brand new, which
Yeah.
is why when you rank, your LinkedIn might rank before your website will rank as a
Yeah.
company page. And people don't think about that. So no index first, social signals, then index, and then the social signals, which will already rank locally, will point to your actual geolocalized site, and then indexation increases significantly. So that would be the maybe one tweak in terms of the order of events. People often do it the wrong way around.
And then you start ranking, right? And
Yeah,
then you start
yeah,
ranking.